Are you ready to boost your career in a unique way? If so, welcome to a milestone moment, the 100th episode of Neurocareers Doing the Impossible. For this special occasion, I, Milena Korostenskaja, host of Neurocareers, am stepping into the hot seat. Instead of hosting, I'm beyond excited to be interviewed by one of my incredible former podcast guests, Dr. Courtnie Paschall. Joining me is a powerhouse panel of podcasting experts. Harrison King, known as the BCI Guy and an inspiring science communicator. Mike McClellan, our brilliant editor who brings the magic to Neurocareers behind the scenes. And Stephen Ho, host of the Neurratives podcast. Together, we'll explore how to launch your own podcast and discuss how podcasting can elevate your career in science and tech, helping you build valuable networks, showcase your expertise, and make a real impact. As a special treat, you'll also hear us answering live questions from our audience. So, if you are thinking about starting a podcast or looking to take your show to the next level, join us for practical tips, fresh ideas, and unique insights you won't find anywhere else. Not even on ChatGPT. Here is to the next step in your career. Let's dive in.
Hi, everybody. I'll say hello and welcome to the Tech and Science Podcasting 101 Tips and Live Q&A. I'm Courtnie Paschall, a researcher and entrepreneur in the neurotechnology space, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator for today's panel conversation. This LinkedIn Live event is designed for anyone curious about starting a podcast, whether you want to explore it as a passion project, enhance your career, or dive into science communication. We've assembled an amazing panel of neurotech podcasters to bring you a backstage pass into the world of podcasting. Today, we'll discuss how to start and grow a podcast, tips for equipment and software setups, motivation, lessons learned, how podcasting is great for career development, and other tips for success. At the end, we'll explore the panel's ideas about the future of podcasting, including how it's evolving with AI and LLM tools, as well as virtual spaces. If there's time, I'd love to touch on recent advances in our niche world of neurotechnology, where we think the field is headed, and the dream guests our panelists would love to invite on their shows. Think of this episode as a blend of personal stories, practical advice, and future-focused insights. Hopefully, a valuable resource for both aspiring podcasters and neurotech enthusiasts. We'll take audience questions throughout as best we can. There's a little bit of a delay with LinkedIn Live events, so please do chime in. Now, to introduce our incredible panel, we'll start with Dr. Milena Korostenskaja, or Dr. K, who has led research involving neuroimaging and brain-computer interfaces. She works as a BCI and neurostimulation scientist at GTech Medical Engineering, while also offering career coaching through the Institute of Neuro Approaches and her podcast, Neurocareers Doing the Impossible. Thank you, Dr. K. We also have Stephen Ho, an engineer at BlackRock Neurotech and co-host of Neurratives, a podcast about neuroscience and fiction, along with Nick Halper. The show humorously explores neuroscience themes in popular media, with topics ranging from brain-computer interfaces in musicals to neuroethics in sci-fi films like Young E. Harrison Canning is with us as well, the creator of the BCI Guys, the host of the Brainstream podcast, a neurotech innovation strategist at BlackRock Neurotech, and a master's student at Harvard Medical School. Harrison focuses on neuroscience communication and was previously featured on Milena's Neurocareers podcast in an episode about his career in science communication. We also have Mike McClellan, an aerospace engineer by day and podcast editor by passion. He is an extremely multi-talented guy with degrees in physics, mechanical engineering, music composition, and music theory, evidenced by his background. Literal in this podcast, you can see all the musical instruments. He will offer insights into the technical side of podcast production. It is genuinely an honor to have you all here. And so I will pass the mic now to each of you. If you would kind of redo my intros. Give us an idea of who you are, what you do, and a bit about where your podcast is now.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having all of us. This is a great panel. I'm excited to be able to chat with all of you. I think you did a great intro for me, but I'm Harrison. I have a YouTube channel called the BCI Guys, where I create educational content about neurotechnology and brain-computer interfacing. From that, I consider the Brainstream podcast an extension of that. So that's all together. I'm a neurotech policy and ethics student at Harvard Medical School, and at BlackRock Neurotech, I do business development work.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I'm Stephen Ho, and I work as an engineer at BlackRock Neurotech, doing upstream neuromodulation product development. And I certainly don't want to step on any toes in terms of, topics we're going to get to. But sometime in summer of 2020, I think we all found ourselves with a lot of time at home. And I was listening to a lot of podcasts. And at some point, long story short, I sort of made the podcast I would have listened to had it been in existence at that time. Part of it was an excuse to just kind of like hang out with, at the time, valued colleague and now wonderful friend, Nick Halper, who has also been in the neurotech industry and is now a COO at Motif Neurotech, to talk about these things in, a more relaxed way.
And hi, my name is Mike McClellan. Thank you for the introduction. Happy to be here. Aeronautical engineer by day. I design structural repairs for a fleet of Air Force surveillance planes. That's what we do here. But I'm a lifelong musician by passion. Have always been involved with music in some way, either writing or performing, directing musical theater, orchestrating, putting an orchestra together for fundraising concerts. I'm producing recordings for local songwriters. And so being behind the mixing desk, it just goes along with being a musician. Yeah, if you're going to orchestrate, you have to know where each instrument fits. And so you're used to listening to different ranges in a mix. And when I was introduced to podcasts, and had an opportunity to edit one for free, of course, I was like, hey, this is pretty fun. I get to keep my technical skills busy. I don't have to spend hours and hours creating music because it does. Yeah, music is much different than creating a podcast. And it's really fun to do what I do. And so I'm the behind the scenes guy. I don't have a podcast. I enjoy being behind the scenes, making somebody sound good. And so if your audio needs help, I can help you get there.
Yes, and I can attest to that because many of our podcast guests, they comment on Mike's work because Mike edits my Neurocareers podcast, and they're saying that the editing is absolutely incredible. So Mike really takes very, very good care of the podcast episodes. So thank you very much, Mike. I truly appreciate it. And listeners, colleagues here on LinkedIn, it's a great pleasure to be here today. And I am hosting Neurocareers, doing the Impossible podcast, and how it came to be. I am also a teacher and educator at the university. And I noticed at the beginning of the semester when I was asking students, what career do you want to choose? And I was teaching neuroscience-related courses. None of the students said that they want to choose a career of being a neuroscientist. No neurotechnology, no neuroscience, nothing. And it was so surprising to me. So they were taking those neuroscience-related courses to help them pursue other careers. Let's say medical doctor, or it can be a physical therapy, something related to health, but not neuroscience. And I started thinking of what's going on, what's the reason? And I thought that maybe people just don't know much about these amazing careers in neuroscience and neurotechnology. And why don't I tell people about that and educate them and inspire them to choose a career in neuroscience and neurotechnology? So that was the main point for me to start this type of podcast. So already for several years, and we have 98 episodes so far. So I'm very proud of it.
Hats off to you. I think I have 9, so I have a lot more videos, but wow, that's very impressive. And I just want to say, I love your concept because I have heard from so many students and also studying neuroscience myself that the 2 options that students are given out of undergrad is you can either be a researcher or you can be a medical doctor. And I've had plenty of people come to me and say, okay, I'm really interested in the brain, obviously, but I don't think I want to fit in either of those buckets. And your podcast has really shown how many different directions you can go. And I always say, everyone has a brain, so I think you can apply neuroscience to whatever you do in any industry.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's the main point, to show all the multifaceted variety of what's possible. Thank you so much, Harrison.
So this is kind of obviously a perfect lead-in. Milena, you saw this gap. Students didn't really know what careers were possible. And so you found the medium of podcasting to bring that information. Stephen, you talked about filling that time in the COVID down years. You made the podcast that you wish you could have listened to. This panel came together because I had, in the course of a week, 3 different people approach me about starting their own podcasts. The hardware, the software, the kind of the format. And so I'm curious, as you guys identified these needs, and Harrison, I know you've kind of run a number of different interview structures, conversation styles. You've kind of had a range of podcast vibes. How did you, I will say, decide on your format, interview, non-interview? And then how did you kind of make that first step from, oh, I have this idea, wouldn't this be cool, to, okay, actually I'm doing this and this is how I'm doing it?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I do think that it's really important when starting a podcast or YouTube channel, whatever it is, to be thinking about what you want that format to be. And you identified a few of those options, whether it's an interview format or it could be just an individual that's sharing information on a topic. And for me, I wanted it to be interview format, but instead of focusing just on the individual, I really wanted to pick a topic for each video. And within the neurotechnology industry, there's so much diversity in terms of different devices that are being created, different research that's going on. And so, I really wanted to focus on a separate topic each time, but then bring in someone who had just written a book or published a paper within that segment, and someone that's respected in that area. One example I'll go to is I spoke to Dr. Amy Rochford, who I think is at Science Corp right now, and she's an expert on biohybrid interfaces. And that's not something that I knew much about before, but I went away from that really, really impressed. And the point of that was certainly to talk about her work at the end, but really for her to give the audience an opportunity to learn about this new technology.
I guess I'll add on there, as somebody that doesn't do an interview style podcast. Sort of the genesis for that was in listening to various podcasts, I realized that you can listen to 2 people that are into something and engaged with that subject talk about that thing, and it'll be really interesting if they sort of vibe with each other and are both engaged with the subject. Even if somebody isn't necessarily an expert in that subject as a listener, if the 2 people are super into it and engaged with it, then it's going to be a pretty good listening experience as well. And that was my experience with various movie rewatch podcasts or podcasts for various fandoms that I wasn't necessarily a part of. But listening to these people that were super into this thing and just talk about it was oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah, how about I do that, but for neuroscience and movies? So, and that's sort of how that grew out and how that format kind of coalesced. Because I'll specifically say that it was a James Bond movie rewatch podcast that kind of inspired me, and I was like, what if we had that for neuroscience? And it didn't exist. And so for me, the format was yeah, no, this makes so much sense to do, but it isn't a thing quite yet. So there's various, I don't know, BuzzFeed articles, I guess, for that, but no recurring sort of content for it. So it was okay, well, let's figure out how to do this.
And I'm curious, before I move on, so Stephen, I think you're the only one with a co-host, a dedicated co-host. So did you approach Nick and you're dude, I got an idea? Or was it a together decision where
Yeah,
We vibe
it was
well.
literally, yeah. So it was the former at a taco cart. So
And he said yes, and
yeah,
got your tech stack, got your software. What was your first episode? I'm curious.
that's a very good question. Let me check. Let me check
Oh,
Spotify real
look at me.
quick.
Sorry, I put you on. I didn't know if it was iconic.
Honestly, okay. So it's the Star Trek Geordi LaForge's Visor episode, and I will say, in retrospect, that's probably one of the rougher episodes, just because we hadn't fully coalesced into what it would eventually become. But no, yeah. But I still like it just because I really like Star Trek. So yeah.
I want to interrupt us for a short question here. So Eric Schadler is asking, how do you do your background research on each topic speaker prior to each podcast and interview? Who would like to take that?
Sure. I think I'll go first because it's an easier answer for me anyways. The obvious answer is we watch the movie. I actually talk about this a decent amount on the podcast. My workflow is I'll watch the movie once, just like watching it, and then I'll watch it another time, like sort of as like a deep, as like a critical, reading, so to speak, or I'm like pausing, taking notes and everything. And then that second watch is where I kind of like outline the structure of the synopsis and okay, this makes sense as how the episode flow should probably go.
And then Milena, I didn't want to move on before we had a chance. How did you end up deciding? So you knew you wanted to bring Neurocareers information to your students. Was it evident for you that it would be an interview, or did you kick around other formats, other ideas?
Yes, it was evident that it would be an interview, and specifically I wanted to bring people from all the variety of fields related to neuro. So I definitely started looking into talking to people, interviewing different people, and my first guest was Dr. Christoph Guger. And I was so happy that he immediately said yes. In general, he likes good ideas, and I'm very grateful to him for that. And it was a great start.
Awesome.
For me, it just comes out of I come across an interesting paper or a book, or I see someone talk, and whatever that piece of media is gets me interested in that topic. So a little bit about what Stephen was talking about, actually, where when you see someone that's so passionate, excited about their thing, that you start to get engaged with that as well. And so I look for people in the neurotech industry that have their little niche within a niche. And then I will look them up on LinkedIn, learn a little bit more about them, reach out. I always do, whether it's for a video or podcast, storyboarding, so I can kind of know how that podcast will flow. And I want to make sure that it's mutually beneficial for the person coming on the podcast. So I make sure that there's time for them to talk about that new paper or that book. But I usually put that at the end because I also want to ensure for the audience that we are talking about this subject generally as well, not just about the company that this person comes from or their life story specifically, but really teaching about the topic.
Thank you. So it's funny, I'm taking notes. This is very much kind of my first podcast, if you will. So this is an active learning session. For you guys, that first episode, right, takes a lot of prep work. There's a lot of decisions that you have to make. What were those first hardware decisions, software decisions? Did you edit your own podcast? Did you not edit them at all and just kind of throw it up on various platforms? How did you find those platforms? And let's start with like those first steps, and then we'll talk about where you matured and what drove those decisions.
Yeah, so Colin, who I started BCI Guys with, and I had the idea to start because we had started a research group together, and we wanted to, in the pandemic, be able to create content to keep educating them and the other people in our lab and giving them interesting content, hopefully to continue to learn from. And our first idea for a more YouTube-y video that wasn't just like a lecture with slides was covering the matrix and trying to discuss what was realistic and what was not realistic. And I just remember, we were going based on, I think, what we imagined professional podcasters would do. And we were like, oh, a 4K camera, not knowing that there's so much difference between what that actually means. And we bought an $80 4K camera from AliExpress, which was not the best. We were recording on a terrible mic. We went to Lowe's across the street and bought like some side paneling for a house, which we strung from the ceiling behind us to try to have, and then like put up a poster of our logo to try to make it look professional. I think there was a fake plant involved as well. And looking back, I mean, it looks ridiculous. The lighting was a mess. The sound quality was terrible, but it's a starting point. And it's funny to look from there and from the things that I've learned over the years, and then to compare what I'm doing to others and seeing, okay, there's still quite a ways to go, and I'm just kind of winging it, and you learn along the way.
Yeah, I think that's so important what you said, Harrison. And I want to emphasize that for everyone who wants to start. So don't wait until you have perfect setup, perfect equipment, perfect lighting, and things like that. Perfect script, perfect guest. You don't need to do that. Start where you are. With everything you have, you will improve over time, and it happens to all of us. And not only in podcasting, in article writing and teaching, and even in your job. Yes. So don't wait. Just start doing it.
Yeah, I'd like to second that. I was introduced to podcasts through my wife. Her podcast is called The Productive Woman, and we just finished episode 500, and now she's taken her first break in 9 years. And so she interviews guests, and going back to the previous question of how do you prepare, a lot of her guests have written books, and so she'll read the books and highlight areas that sound like they might be of interest to talk about on the podcast. That's really how she does her prep, or whatever internet research is available on a person. And so she'll learn what she can that way. But I just want to second what Milena says. When it comes time to starting one, she bought a mic, a rolling desktop recorder, fumbled through the first episode, said, oh, that's terrible. Sat on it for about a month, and through prodding and encouragement, I guess we'll say, just release it. Don't worry about if it's perfect, if it's edited. We didn't edit it. She didn't edit it. She didn't want me involved for the first year. She didn't, no, I don't want you listening to my stuff. She would have a music intro. She'd pop it in, record her voice, little music outro, upload to the internet. That was the show. Yeah, they're not perfect now, but you got to start somewhere, and you might as well just learn by doing it.
I agree with that so much. I think this is especially true for videos, but your first videos are not going to be great, and that's okay. I remember being so particular about the editing and making sure that everything looked perfect, quote unquote. And of course, looking back, it was like, that was not good. But that's okay. That's the process, And I think that if you just understand going in, the first ones are not going to be great in your mind, and that it's really more about the topic, then I think that's a good way to think about it and jump in. And others, I think, will engage with you anyway based on interest in the topic, and then those other pieces fall into place.
So I was somewhat lucky in that Nick is also a musician and understands audio setups quite well. And so I had somebody to kind of like tell me, okay, for an introductory mic or whatever, which I still use, by the way, like this is what you should use. This is what makes sense. These are the basic ideas of like, just kind of trying to deaden the sound so you don't get like, stupid amounts of echo. And so I am very lucky in that my co-host was able to sort of walk me through those sorts of things. And in terms of like services or whatever, like I use what I use, but I have the hunch that one's as good as any other, frankly. I think Google is somebody's friend. It can be anybody's friend for looking for those sorts of like distribution services, recording things, like if you really have to, yes, you can like, just all record locally and then try and sync up through clapping your hands or something. It's a little silly and it'll make editing a little wonky, but you could do that, like if you really wanted to. There's any number of ways to kind of get it done, and a lot of services that streamline it. And like I said, I use what I use, but my hunch is they're all kind of the same. So
Yeah, I think in terms of services, there are just a few that I find useful. So for distribution, rss.com will just one click push out to any podcast platform, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever. I find that to be useful. I usually record in a software called Zencaster.
oh, I use Zencaster.
Yeah, so it records locally. It's like a Zoom call, but it records people's audio on their own computer so that if there's some internet issue that you can just combine those files after, which I think is good. And Mike, you're going to want to cover your ears for this one. But I have been using Adobe Enhance, which is a AI tool that automatically cleans up audio. And it's really impressive what it can do. You can take pretty bad sounding audio and have it come out decent. Now, is it going to be as good as professional editing? No, absolutely not. But I think if you are just getting started and you really don't know what you're doing on the editing side of things, you can throw it in there and that'll give you a pretty decent starting point.
Yeah. On the editing side, so I do my own editing, and at first, because it was sort of I'm dipping my toes in sort of deal. I didn't want to like purchase a license for things, so I just started editing in Audacity, open source audio software. I don't recommend that. To be clear, I still do that because I have gotten good at like the Audacity workflow. I'm just like mechanically fast at it because I've set up buttons and everything, and I can go through do it. I wouldn't recommend that because I feel like using something like Adobe Audition or something would probably that like a professionally made workflow is probably just a lot more like user friendly. Again, like the only reason I stick to like what I started with is just because I started with it and I got used to it, and I'm like pretty good with that now. So I explicitly don't recommend it.
Milena, when you first started, had you met Mike, or were you doing your own kind of editing and then this partnership formed?
Yes, I was doing my own editing with Audacity, similar to Stephen, and it was taking hours for me. And I simply didn't have that time because I'm always a busy person. I have many responsibilities. And I just started looking for somebody who can work on this with me and support me. And this is how I found Mike. So that was my lucky day. And the lucky day for my Neurocareers and doing the impossible podcast.
Perfect. And Mike, what tech stack do you use? What do you work in?
Something that none of the audience will be interested in, actually. As an old musician, I started using Digital Performer, which began as Performer. It was for Macs only in the 80s. And I think that's when it came out. Maybe it been early 90s. But that was what was taught in college as well. I didn't go to music school until I was 35. And it happens that being in music school, I went to Ithaca College in New York, and the Digital Performers all happened. I already owned it and had worked on it, done orchestrations for several years, and turns out that's what they use there. Well, cool, that made it pretty easy. But it's pretty complex. That's similar to Pro Tools, if you're familiar with that name. And that's not a program that an average podcaster will be interested in, because it's really for fine audio control. You'll want something like, so anyway, Audacity is a good beginning point, but it's a destructive editor. Once you make a cut, that's it. And you can do a Control-Z to undo it.
You can do a lot of Control-Zs to undo a lot of things.
Yeah.
Which I do a lot.
So anyway, Digital Performer is what I use. If I was going to buy one now, editors I know use Hindenburg is supposed to be a good one. I haven't bought it yet. I want to buy it just to try it. It's not that expensive. I think just a few $100s. I'll probably buy that pretty soon here just to play with it and see what it does. Some people use the Adobe stuff. I don't like subscription services, and so I won't buy anything that's a subscription service. If I can't own the software, I'm an old guy. I used to get a CD-ROM and plug it into my computer, and that's how I load it. And I own something physical. I want to own something. I don't want to buy a digital, invisible thing. Unfortunately, that's the way the world has gone.
Yeah.
So that I have a shelf full of discs, and I like that. What else is there? And so there's other online services. For example, my wife, she records into, I will say what she does, her current setup, she's gotten away from the XLR mic and uses a USB mic. She uses it's not the Rode Pod mic, but it's a precursor to the Rode Pod mic, which is a pretty good mic. She was using an XLR mic, an SM7B before that, which is a really nice $400 microphone. I like the sound of it. I like it better than the Pod mic, but the Pod mic is still a good mic, and it's simplified her setup. You plug it into the computer. Rode has their own software, like MIDI mics that you buy now. It's going to have software that comes with it. She records right into that and just sends me the file. For new podcasters, now getting away from the editing side into the setup side, what do you record into? You can record into Digital Performer. You could record into, I think Hindenburg will do it, any of the digital audio workstations, Pro Tools. But if you buy something like a Rode Pod mic, but the Rode software has made it so easy for her. She loves it. Gets out her computer, gets out the mic, records, puts it away, and goes back to work. So there's an idea to consider.
Yeah, and we can add all this information into our podcast notes. So I'm just letting know all our listeners that it all will go into podcast notes, and you will be able to find that information.
Can I add one very small editing tip? I use Premiere Pro, which is more for video editing than audio, but one feature that it has is that it automatically can transcribe the entire conversation, entire video. There are other services. There's a cheaper one called Descript that does this as well. And that's really useful, especially if for videos I have multiple takes, as opposed to having to listen to it over and over and over again, which, especially if it's your own voice, is very painful, especially in the beginning. It's nice to be able to see those words and clip it. There are also another thing that I'll do is in between takes, I will click my tongue 3 times, which creates in the audio, you will be able to see 3 very clear, very loud points, and then you can know to edit around that. I won't do that now because it's very annoying to hear through your headphones, but those things you learn are very helpful for speeding up the editing process.
And I've also, if I can just finish, Digital Performer is strictly audio. So for video, I use DaVinci Resolve. There's another name of a software you can use.
Yes, I will interrupt us again because we have another question. And I want to allude to all our colleagues listening to us, please send questions. That's why we're doing this LinkedIn event. So we have another question from Eric Chadler. And Eric is asking, are there ways to measure impact of your work, such as number of listeners, etc.? And are there certain duration of podcasts, 30 minutes, 1 hour, better than others? So what do we have to say about that?
So most distribution platforms, so I use what used to be called Anchor FM. Now it's owned by Spotify, and it's just called, like, I think Spotify Podcasts or something, but it's similar to what you described, Harrison. It just pushes it to whatever services you tell it to. And it does tell you metrics per episode, like per region, whatever, like, and all that, good stuff. As far as duration, me and Neurratives format has always been at a minimum like an hour and 15 minutes, which is, I have had more than one person tell me, it's like, yeah, I listen to your stuff on like 2x or 1.5x because they do it like during a commute or something, and hopefully they don't have like a 1.5 hour commute. I would imagine like 45 minutes to an hour is probably like a pretty good sweet spot, but I certainly don't fall in that.
Yeah, and I belong to a group called the Podcast Editors Club and various other podcast groups on Facebook. That question comes up often. The general takeaway is whatever suits your audience. For example, Milena's topic is very science-oriented. And in an area that where I don't work, I'm not a neuroscientist. I find it very interesting, but I also understand that I see that it takes a lot of time to explain things. And so in that world, a long podcast, an hour to 2 hours is suitable. The Productive Woman runs about 45 minutes. And maybe it's just that I've been married to my wife for 45 years, but after listening to her for 45 minutes, I'd say, can't you make a 30-minute show?
1.5.
That's a good point. So I have experience of making long episodes, like in Neurocareers. It's over an hour long usually. And when I understand one thing is to give it a listen to a specialist, and another one not a specialist but a person that might be interested is listening. So it's a very different game. What happens that when the person who is not very familiar with the field listens to it, it's a little bit overwhelming to listen the podcast for such a long time. And when I gave my new podcast, that is much shorter, so it's about half an hour. So it's called Brain Myths Debunked. We released the first episode, and it's about 30 minutes long. It was so much easier for a person to listen. So the person didn't have any problems listening to this short. So I would say probably up until 30 minutes, 45 the most. That would be my recommendation. But again, depends on the podcast, depends on listeners, like Mike said. Yes, if we need to explain many details, but the general rule would be, short ones is good ones. There is even a format when people do like 10 minutes, even 5 minutes, very short podcasts, just often, but they're short to the point and give the information. I think everything depends on the purpose. What do you want to do? I personally want to really, really take this opportunity and learn everything what the person does. And I would be doing it for 3 hours if I could. Because I have so many questions. But maybe you're a different person. You just want to get into the most important things, just highlight something. So for you, it would be short. Yes, so I think it really depends on many factors, and they should be considered.
Yes, think about how your listener is engaging with your podcast. Like where are they? What are they trying to get out of it? If it's a very technical podcast, then they're going to want to be probably just focusing on that. That might not be something that they're doing when they're driving or working or something like that. If it's a very casual conversation that's maybe more pop culture based, then that may be something that people are doing while they're washing dishes or just having on in the background. And I think that format can be longer. And also, if it's just one person, I think that should probably be under an hour. That's just my opinion on that.
Awesome. So I'm hearing this idea, have an idea of who you're talking to and what you want to get out of it. Something that you all have started to touch on, whether it's storyboarding or kind of mapping out that flow of the podcast. I have to imagine when you first started, that didn't come naturally. How have you learned to map that out, to stay on target, get through everything you want to talk about, and leave room for that dynamic interaction?
For me specifically, I think part of that comes from understanding, as we've done more episodes, what me and Nick find funny or interesting. Obviously, when you're first starting out, you don't know those things. You don't know what you don't know. And so when you're starting out, you're kind of obsessively starting mapping out every detail and trying to map out every single point of discussion and experience and and more interaction with your co-host in a format. You now understand, okay, yes, I don't need to specifically call out here, we're going to talk about this thing and and map out, the 5 to 10 minutes of discussion. It's like, you just know it's going to happen. And that is just a comfort level, a time thing. There's no way to kind of come into it cold. And it is a great thing to have develop, because it really does make the mapping out part of it so much easier.
I use a tool called Figma and FigJam, It's design software, but it's basically a open digital whiteboard. There's also Miro, or you could even just put sticky notes on a wall. But I just take everything, links, ideas, snippets of conversation that I think might be interesting, and I just throw it all in this open whiteboard, and then I move things around. And I generally try to chunk up the podcast to start with an introduction of the individual and a short focus on their background. The meat of it is explaining the topic, and then that is the part where I'm doing a lot of that, moving sticky notes around, moving chunks of the podcast around, and then focusing on the end on whatever recent piece of media they've done. But just having something to just dump everything on and then try to add structure in the end is really important for me in this and just other types of work that I do. I always need that starting point.
I like this. I definitely will try Figma. Yes, you mentioned the software.
Yes.
Very interesting. Yes. So I have a more intuitive approach that I'm using. I still have a structure, so I know what my listeners want to hear, what they need to hear. It's also based on what I learned about the listeners because they communicate with me. They write, they say what they liked, what was interesting, what was helpful. So I gather all that information and I incorporate those questions in the podcast, but I also leave space for exploration. I love the conversation to go to the direction that I might even not be aware of. Yes. So, of course, I would learn about the person and I would ask questions that already are based on that information, but I would open the space for something that I might not know. And there are so many amazing things that are happening in the podcast, so much uniqueness that people bring to the table. And I love this task of exploration, just being in that flow, just being curious about what person is talking about and bringing something that you even wouldn't expect something.
So I'm picturing, let's say we had a person out in the audience that has been wanting to start a podcast. They have a general sense now of maybe some tools they could start with, some hardware, how to orchestrate and set up that first interview or whatever format they've chosen. I'm kind of curious. So they get started. In your experience, when are they going to hit that wall? And that wall could be no one's listening. I'm not sure what to do next. I don't know where to pivot. I don't know how to find people. Did you guys hit that point in your podcast journeys? What was it and what got you to the other side?
So,
Maybe there's no wall.
as in life, there are infinity walls that, can at any point kind of pop up. I think like in this space, like none of us do this as, our full-time jobs. And so there are any number of like life things that can pop up as walls. So those happen, especially for you all. I don't necessarily have this problem, but you all also that do the interview style, you all are kind of dependent on other people's schedules, which is, boy, I can't even imagine how much that must be to deal with, because even just arranging two adults who are friends, their schedules is tough enough, right? So, scheduling, life, like all those sorts of things, like all will, conspire. And next thing you know, time makes fools of us all. I haven't released an episode in forever or whatever, right? So there's that. As far as like walls and like listenership, it's like, look, if you enjoy what you're doing, it's like, just don't even worry about it. For me, like my podcast is a conversation with a friend about fun things. Cool. I enjoy it. And, it is what it is. And I would encourage anyone to like engage with the content they create in that manner. Obviously, in terms of like, content, it's easy to place value on it as literally how many people like you. It's inevitable. But I would encourage people to, as much as is possible, to try and like, value it on its own terms and what they personally get from it.
I think that's a good point, because traditionally with any type of social media content or digital content, whether it's a podcast or a video or a post, we are trained to think about it as the number of views that it gets is the best metric, right? And or the number of subscribers. And I think all of us are in neurotech. And so I'm assuming everyone listening is probably neurotech or neurotech adjacent. And we're a small niche industry, which I think is wonderful because the community is really supportive and the listeners and watchers that we do have are really, really engaged. So try to focus on that. And even if growth seems slow and the listenership is not what you think success looks like, that doesn't mean that it's not providing value to other people and that it won't be opening doors for you or whatever your goal is with creating the content. I do think that other metrics are helpful, such as watch time, in just determining what people are interested in. And if you see a drop off in watch time, I think that's the best indicator of, okay, maybe people were less interested in that topic. Now, I agree with Stephen. You don't want to get like so focused on that you're losing the fun in what you're doing. And ultimately, to continue doing this, it should be something that you're excited to do. But that's good feedback to have. And the other piece of advice that I would have is before you start releasing content, it's a good idea to have a backlog of 5 or 10 videos or podcasts. Now, if it's an interview style, that might be a little bit harder to do unless you're doing them back to back. But that's something that I did not do. And I have not posted in a while I've got work and grad school, and I really love making videos, but I just don't have the time. And if you really are trying to grow, consistency of posting, whether it's weekly or monthly, is really important. And so if you can just have that backlog of a video or a podcast that you can always throw out if you miss your target, that is really going to help you in the long run. So do as I say, not as I do on that one. But I wish I had thought about that ahead of time.
I'd like to back up what Harrison just said. When the Productive Woman began, my wife was very focused on metrics. We use Libsyn for that, is to distribute her podcasts, and there you can go in there and see how many downloads and what part of the world the downloads are happening in, and that's pretty cool to see when you're first beginning. And that was what she used as a metric for success. And as it went on, I think she was pretty psyched. I think it was before the second year when she had 1 million downloads. Then she felt successful. But one thing that has helped her build her podcast, and again, it's based around the topic. It's focused on women and how to have meaningful, productive lives. And so that's pretty specific, and a lot of people are interested in that. She started a Facebook group, this Productive Woman Facebook group. It's not open to anybody. She makes sure people fill out a questionnaire to make sure it's only women are allowed. And she's just really verifying that it's not just a troller, that's not a bot or somebody who's coming in to make trouble. And that group has really grown, helped her. I don't know if it's helped her grow in the podcast, but it's made a solid group of supporters, of listeners that let her know that, hey, I really like this last episode. What do you think about doing one on this? She gets ideas from that as well for topics for future shows. They've been very supportive. And what it's led into is she put a query out there. Would anybody be interested in having a Productive Woman retreat? 6 women, my house. And so we've done a couple of those here. The other thing she's done is Milena does coaching. Laura also does coaching sessions via remotely, 12 sessions for a cost, and with a limit of, I think it's 5 women. This is another idea to help you grow and engage your audience. But don't be so focused on the metrics. I know when you start, that's the only thing you have to gauge success. But really, keep it fun. This isn't, as they've said, it's not our career. It's something we do because we love it. And in our case, Laura does it because she loves it and wants to help people.
Yes, exactly. I absolutely agree with that, and it's a big joy to do this, and for me it is. I remember when I just wrote a script for my first podcast, what I wanted to talk about. It was what Dr. Kristen Kruger from GTED. I felt so happy, like I hasn't been happy for a very long time. I just felt I'm the happiest person in the universe. So when I was doing it for my first podcast, so it's really an enjoyable experience. And you might start with something and you might not like it, or you might decide to switch to something different. And it's not necessarily that you will be doing this podcast for your entire life. You might decide that you will be doing it for a year and you will just see how it works for you. Or you might decide, yes, it's my long time life journey and I will be doing it. Yes, so it's so flexible. It's all in your hand. This is all in your hands. I think that is the most valuable part, is that it's yours. It's your decision. How long? What is the duration? Are you doing it yourself, just on your own, bringing some information, knowledge, or you're interviewing, or you're creating something like Stephen does with his friend, creating this interesting interaction? So it's all depends on you. And I think that's the most beautiful part. For me personally, what keeps me going, what I started at the first place, to provide people with the education and options of what's possible and how to make the impossible possible. And what inspires me and supports me, of course, what people write, what people tell me when they contact me on LinkedIn and they say, oh, we really enjoyed this, that was interesting, that helped me in this way. I meet with people. I always offer one free Neurocareers coaching session, so people come with their questions already, listen to my podcast and tell me how it helped them. So this definitely keeps me going, even when I'm tired on the weekend. I don't want sometimes to do things, but I know that it's helping people and it really motivates me. And we have another question. The question is from Eric Shadler. Eric, thank you so much for sending your questions. Do you provide guests with a list of questions before the interview? What do we have to say about that?
I will provide topics and bullet points. So I want it to be a free-flowing conversation. So I don't want to say, okay, here's the question. But because I do want to focus on a topic and educating on that topic, there are specific sections that I want to hit within the conversation. And so I do send that ahead of time. And I often like to work with them on what ends up in there. I'm a little bit less flexible on the promotional side of things because the podcast is not sponsored, and so I don't want to turn it into an ad. I, of course, am happy to give people the value of coming on and promoting their own work, but I don't allow on that part someone to curate questions ahead of time. But for the rest of it, I send it out loud.
As a primarily non-interview focused and with relatively few guests, for the times that I do have guests on, I essentially just walk them through the structure, synopsis of movie, jump in wherever you feel you have comments or whatever, and then we have our segments and kind of summary, and that's broadly speaking it. And I ask them to watch the movie, obviously, and we can get into why that is a challenge sometimes.
What I noticed when I provide questions in advance, what happens first? People get very overwhelmed because there are quite a few questions. Yes, when it is in a live interview, people don't notice this, that there are so many questions. But actually, when I write all of them down, it becomes really, really daunting. And people start trying to write replies, their answers, prepare them. And it turns sometimes into already 2 years or 1 year affairs. Yeah, so people are still preparing the conversation. So that's one thing that happens. Another thing that happens, because people, again, they prepare, yes, they write everything down. And instead of the live conversation, when people are conversing, talking, people start reading from what they wrote. I am open for all types of experiences, but I would prefer if we will have a live conversation. So that is my preference. That's why I try not to send any questions, but when people are asking about the general theme, of course, I explain it's careers, it's your path into Neurocareers, and of course, your research, whatever you do in this field. That is the main point of discussion, challenges and how you overcame them, and of course, how to do the impossible possible. So it's just a very general framework. So that's my experience and my approach.
Beautiful. I think one of the things that we're also touching on is this idea of fringe benefits, whether it's having this amazing conversation with your friend around a topic that you feel interesting, building a community. Mike, you mentioned that your wife's podcast has really expanded to this large and involved community. How have you guys seen your podcast bring these fringe benefits, community, work, research, other?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and the benefits have been endless. Making content has been the best thing for my career across the board. I started in 2020 when I was still in my undergrad, and it came out of passion. There wasn't a long-term motive when I was starting, but I found that it was really helpful in creating a portfolio that I could point to show that I'm well versed within the neurotechnology space and understand this content and can explain it to a general audience, as well as just a representation of other skills that I have for video editing and design work. I ended up getting my job at BlackRock Neurotech through that. They were interested in doing a sponsored video, and then I did some consulting work for several months for BlackRock. I also think that it was helpful in showing to Harvard when I was applying the type of work that I wanted to do, and I had a lot of ethics and policy focused videos that I could point to, which help explain the topic, because again, neurotech is pretty niche. So I think it's been helpful in all of that, but also just going to conferences and finding people come up to me that know me from the podcast or from videos has been really cool to see. Again, because metrics wise, it looks very small, but within the community, it does have an impact. And then it's a really great way to network and get your foot in the door, to be able to say, hey, I have a podcast. Do you want to come on and we can just chat about your new book or whatever? And honestly, that's been the best benefit that's come out of it, is just the ability to have something to offer, to talk to cool people in the space. And this is especially true if you have a .edu address or email address. So if you're, an undergrad or master's student or whatever, people, especially in a small industry, are generally excited to talk to students that are passionate about the space and are interested in the work that they're doing. So that's really powerful, and they don't think you have an ulterior motive as well. So yeah, I've found all of that to be very helpful. And the last thing I'll say is it's also nice if you are in between jobs and you're looking for jobs and you're worried about a gap on your resume. Start a project, and hopefully it's more than just to fill that resume gap, but I think that that's nice as well, to be able to have something to point to and say, well, I was doing this at that point, and hopefully it becomes a longer term project for you.
So for me, it's been a really good way to engage with neuroscience and neurotech in a way that's not work, because that's literally my job. With all respect to something like, Matt Engel's wonderful podcast or Ladin's podcast, that's what I do for work. And it's just a great way to kind of talk about these things that I'm very passionate about in a way that's not about how does this make me money? This is what I'm doing to pay the bills, and because, my boss says I'm supposed to. So I think, so for me, I really do enjoy that because, I think in one way or another, this would be some neuroscience, neurotech. If, even if I got a completely unrelated job, I would still be trying to engage with it in some way. And so this allows me to do so, boss mandated, so to speak.
Yep, I get that. Of course, the same here. So I see many benefits that were already mentioned. One benefit is really connecting with people in the field. which for me was very challenging because we were all working remotely for quite some time after COVID, during COVID, after COVID, and I'm here in my office. And that's it. I think that was the best thing that I did during the time started this podcast because I gained this possibility to talk to people who are also interested in the same area, to learn from them, to communicate with them. And so I think that's a huge benefit. What can you wish more? And then meeting these people already at the conferences, and you feel like you knew the person forever. So we meet like old friends and we hug each other. So it was absolutely amazing experience. And of course, opportunity to learn, to network, which I highly recommend to students. Like Harrison said that yes, people are very supportive of students. So if you are a student, you are interested in certain discipline, you want to explore that field further, I highly recommend starting the podcast. You will see how responsive people are and you will learn from them. You will network. It's a great way for your career development. And again, we already talked about that you don't need to set up a podcast for your whole life. You might decide, okay, this year I will explore the newest treatments in Alzheimer's disease, for example. Yes, and I will talk about that, I will network in this space and whatnot. And then you might decide about different series. Like, for example, we are now doing this brain myths debunked. This is a limited series, 12. I decided 12 episodes. That's it. Yes, so you can do that. It's a great thing for you to do, and I would encourage every student to think about something. It might be not audio podcast, it might be video, it might be maybe a blog. Yes, but do this and you will see the amazing results that it brings for you. It doesn't need to be monetized, although of course there are ways, but I'm not there personally yet at all. I'm still supporting my podcast on my personal funds. So.
Awesome. So I kind of want to shift us to this kind of forward-looking thing. I would have imagined if I had a podcast that one of the things that I would love the most is this getting to know a lot of what the neurotech field is doing. You're speaking with people at the leading edge of development in their field, or you are one of those engineers, and now you're talking about the way, right, that kind of the rest of the world is understanding what neurotech is doing. So with these broad experiences that you guys have, I'm curious, what are you most excited about in neurotech? Maybe in a way that, your podcasting content creation experience has influenced. Where do you think we're going?
I'm really excited about, and I'm going to shamelessly steal from my podcast because it's all I can think about right now. But I'm really excited about like the progress speech prosthetics have made. Because if you kind of like look at the progression of motor prosthetics of where they were 20 years ago to where they are today, like speech prosthetics have literally made like those similar gains and progress in like less than 5 years. And there's a number of reasons that's the case. It's a tough population to recruit for. It's tough to find those patients, and it's just been underserved up until this point. But because of the sort of explosion in interest in them, and because they're able to sort of take the lessons and progress that motor brain-computer interfaces have made over 20 years and build on that, knowing everything already, well, not everything, obviously, but knowing what they know already, it's just really, it is truly amazing.
Yeah, I will echo that with speech BCIs for sure. There's been an explosion within the last few years. It's been really interesting to see. I've also been really excited about neuromodulation technologies using focused ultrasound, transcranial magnetic stimulation. I have a personal connection to this. When I was in high school, I had years of chronic migraines. I had tried dozens of different medications and therapies, and nothing was working. And it was near daily migraines. And I enrolled in a clinical trial for a at-home TMS device for chronic pain. And within 30 days, it cut the frequency in half. And then within a year, it pretty much completely got rid of my migraines. I still get 1 or 2 a month, but is very, very reasonable to deal with that compared to where I was before. And that was one of the things that inspired me to get into the field. And I think that the potential for wide-scale use of neuromodulation technologies, whether it's for chronic pain or depression, mood disorders, movement disorders, whatever it is very immediate, and where the devices are there, and hopefully will be rolled out within the next few years to be able to become wide-scale commercial devices. And then a little bit more long-term, I've always been excited about the idea of devices that can try to make our interactions with technology more human. And what I mean by that is just we are looking at 2D screens, we're interacting with a keyboard and mouse, which is not our natural state. Our natural state is walking around and feeling objects with multiple senses, right? We're touching them, and we may even have emotional reactions to things in our environment. And I think it will be very interesting to be able to engage with digital objects in the digital worlds through brain-computer interfaces in a similar way that's more natural to how we interact with the real world.
Yes, so of course I will second what already Stephen and Harrison said. That speech BCIs are absolutely amazing. You will find many episodes on our Neurocareers podcast and from studies from Dr. Chang's group and Sergei Stavitsky, and actually many groups that are working in this domain. This field is exploding. Yes, there is so much going on. That is absolutely amazing. What I envision in the future is really bringing BCIs outside the lab, outside certain controlled environments, out to an open, using them seamlessly everywhere we go, everywhere we are. I think that's where we are heading with the wearable technology, with so when we don't have any ports, when we have the designs can be seamlessly integrated, even in textile. So there are different electrodes that are being developed that we can integrate, and in our clothing, in hats. So something that is very, very intuitive and can be easily integrated in our daily lives. I think many things might change, the way we communicate, the way we signal people. Yes, we have fashion designer Anup Prep, who is creating clothing. Of course, we cannot wear it right now in the open, but the whole concept that with our clothing, we can communicate with people as well. So, for example, if the clothing is reflecting our brain activity or other physiological activity, yes, our heart rate and whatnot. So, different ways to communicate with people. I think that is coming, and I am particularly very interested in cognitive augmentation and general augmentation of our bodies and our abilities. I don't know where this will be, but I think we can expect interesting things in that domain as well. So
awesome. I'll echo. I'm fascinated by where the neural interface with these kind of extended realities, that ability to interact seamlessly that you guys chatted about, pulling back the future talk to that podcast space. There are a whole bunch of new tools, right? There's automated editing. Harrison, you talked about that. AI that can kind of do some of the work of an audio engineer as you get started. There's pushes towards VR chat, we'll say like kind of telepresence, AR things. Do you see the genre of content creation, podcasting changing? Are you guys excited about things that you see coming to maybe your medium?
Yeah, I think that it is getting increasingly easy to create new content. There are plenty of AI tools that are out there that can automatically remove ums and enhance audio. I do think, just like any AI software that we're used to, it's not as good as a professional. But again, in the spirit of what we've been talking about, it doesn't necessarily need to be. It doesn't need to be when you're first starting, and finding tools that help lower the barrier to entry, I think, are really important. So Descript is one that I can think of. I mentioned Adobe Enhance before. And you mentioned VR AR, which I think is interesting. I would love to be able to record podcasts or give talks in the metaverse. I think that would be really funny, and a very interesting way to interact with people. I got a MetaQuest 3 last year and have been excited about the potential of what that can do. So that would be, yeah, I would love to be able to interact with people in that way. So I hope that the technology gets there to a point where we can do that. I mean, it probably already is, but where that's standardized, I guess.
Yeah, admittedly, my approach has always been a little bit dictated by the tools that are easiest to work with, which is, the things that distribute to all platforms for you. And I'll admit, I am unversed in, those emerging technologies and tools available to people, but they sound great, I guess.
I'm seeing like Mystery Science Theater, and it's, you guys talking over the movie entirely, and you could just have that interface. I throw on the headset, watch the movie with you, and I get your shadows and peanut gallery. Just saying.
I mean, like MST3K or riff tracks of Neuro movies, like, yeah, I'll do that. Hell yeah. All day. Like, yeah, like the Alamo Brewhouse like movie roasts. Like, okay, you're right. This is what we do. Like a VR metaverse like drive-in or like screening of gosh, what's the worst movie that we watched? At First Sight. A roast, a live metaverse roast of that led by, this panel. Yes, I'm here for it. 100%. Let's do it.
Next live event. That would be a lot of fun. It'll be a lot of fun.
And I'll just add that I do use an AI program often as a first step in my editing work, because often the audio I receive is not very good. And this AI program is very good at removing reverb, background noises. But if you want to do your own editing, please don't just do jump cuts in your video where one sentence ends and another one begins right on top of it. There's a scansion to, a flow to speaking. And when you take a breath, there might be a 1 second or more pause, 1.2 seconds naturally. And so if you make that an edit point, you need a second of space there. And when you hear it, you don't want to hear the background noise stop and go to dead silence and then pick it back up in again. So there needs to be an overlap and often a crossfade. Usually when I do a cut, I'll do a crossfade between the silence, so you don't hear any of that. Those are some of the finer things you can do when you do edit your own video or audio.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. Maybe we can just briefly all say what not to do in the podcast. What do you think?
Don't use a Blue Yeti microphone. How about, so we're starting with that. Since you're looking for equipment, don't do a Blue Yeti. You want a dynamic microphone as opposed to a condenser microphone. Let's start with that. And you want one with a cardioid pickup pattern that is better at rejecting off-axis noise. You don't want an omnidirectional mic. So I'll give you that as a starting point.
I don't think I can articulate that any better for microphones, but I will just say that, yes, don't use a blue microphone. That was the first one that I bought. I bought a Snowball, and the audio quality was terrible. So
that's a little one that sits on, like the little ball that sits on your desk, right? It's the little ball that
sits on your desk. And the person at Best Buy assured me it would be great for what I was trying to do, but he was not correct. So, but yes, there are others that can give you better mic recommendations than I can. But if you search for podcast mics and find one that is dedicated for that, you can probably get something that's pretty good.
What not to do? Don't use GoDaddy as your web provider. I've been pretty frustrated with that whole deal. Could be a user problem. I don't know, but we're in the process of switching to Squarespace as we speak. And like that has been taken out of my hands for good reasons. I'm the one that chose GoDaddy in the first place, which was, again, not the most amazing experience in the world.
Just keep it simple overall. I tend to overcomplicate things that I do, especially when I care about them. And I have gotten myself all sorts of equipment that I have no idea how to use. And the quality ends up just being much worse than it would be if I used something simpler. And obviously, like it's nice to have a good camera, and it's like there are benefits to this over your phone, but your phone is good enough to start, right? And there are, like, I'm speaking right now on my MacBook microphone, which is not as good as the mic that I usually use, but the mic that I usually use was giving me a lot of difficulty today setting up, and so that's, a reason that you might not want to start with something like that. So just keep it simple. Remember that it's about the content at the end of the day, and people will engage with that. And if you start scaling a lot, you're doing this, that this is going to be more than, that this is going to be a consistent hobby for you, then you can add in those other skills. But just get the content out there. The tools that you already have with you with your phone and computer are probably good enough to get started.
I agree with keeping it simple, but not to don't send your guest 100 questions to prepare for the podcast. So don't do it. And I just wanted to acknowledge several people who they didn't ask questions, but they said hello, and I want for us to say hello back to them. It's Jude Abiji. So he greeted us here, and then we have also Tina Aslani, which also sent us a nice comment. And then Sheila said that we are doing great work and gave us 5 stars. So thank you everyone for your comments, for your questions. So just wanted to make that acknowledgement here.
Excellent. Thank you. I've never streamed on LinkedIn before, so it seems like it's a very supportive audience. I might want to do this more often. And I've never seen a real-time 5-star review, so that's exciting.
Yes, that's very cool. And actually, we are doing the first Neurocareers News Live event. It will be coming up next Monday. I decided that not everyone can attend SFN. Yes, this huge meeting of all neuroscientists, but we all want to be updated on the latest and greatest, at least in the field of neurotech. So I invited several speakers. There will be one on Monday, another on Friday, to speak about the newest trends in neurotech. So it will be a live event. And I hope to continue those Neurocareers news. So if any of you want to jump in on any of those news updates, you are very welcome. And maybe we also can do something all together. So that's my invitation.
Beautiful. We'll roast a movie. Well, I want to confess to you all and the listeners that here's my Blue Yeti. And I sent at least 1,000 questions beforehand and then read from a script. So you can start from anywhere. I take all of your enthusiasm and support. If I had access to those 3 that approached me in that 1 week on how to get started, I really would have sent them this. I think we covered a lot of ground. Thank you all for your time. I'd like to kind of, on our way out, we're right at that 125 mark. Anybody holding on to questions, please shoot them to us before we go. If you guys would like to let us know what's coming up in your podcast, where to find you next, please do.
Well, you can find Neurratives on wherever podcasts live. I think Google Podcasts just died recently, so
All the things.
one fewer now, but you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts are probably the most common now after Google Podcasts is now dead. So I'm sure you'll put a link in the show notes or something there. So, just check it out. Check us out if you'd like. Again, not an interview format, not super serious science or anything. We talk about neuroscience in movies and talk about the movie and talk about the neuroscience in it. And we have a good time doing it.
What's your next movie?
Good question. Let me check what's in my edit folder right now that is waiting on completion. It's a big backlog. So, the good news is there's a potential for a large bolus of content.
Awesome.
The bad news is it's a big backlog. So, oh gosh, I think it's going to be Inside Out too.
Oh, cool. Oh, I can't wait to see that one come out. I'm just curious, how many do you have recorded like in the backlog at any given time?
Usually it's actually like at most 1 or 2. Right now it is like 4. But if we're in like a rhythm or anything, it's at most 1 or 2.
Yeah, so you can find all of my stuff at Brainstream Podcast. So if you just search Brainstream in your podcast app of choice, and I was one of the weirdos that really liked Google Podcasts, so I think I was the only one, but I'm sad about that. You can also find me on YouTube at the BCI Guy and across other social media accounts with that handle, BCI Guys, plural.com. So you can find that there. Unfortunately, with work in grad school, my videos are not all that frequent right now, but I would like to soon kick that up again. I have been recording podcast episodes with some folks around Harvard and MIT that are in the neurotech space. So if you're interested in that, eventually, when I edit them, those will start coming out again.
And about the Neurocareers podcast, you can find on our institute site. It's the Institute of Neuroapproaches, neuroapproaches.org, so neuroapproaches.org. And also Google Neurocareers podcast, and you will find it very easily. And we have a lot of recordings already made and prepared, so they're all lined up, and we will have very interesting content for women in neurotech specifically. So it will be Emma Serbo talking about that. The next podcast that is coming out this weekend, it's Sarah Wandel, and it's amazing work they are doing in helping people with spinal cord injuries. So all that is available. And I also still want to acknowledge we have several other people. Gyodze joined us and she said, what a podcast. I'm taking my notes. So people are learning from us. So we did a good job. And also we had Eric who was asking questions and he gave us another 5-star review. So thank you so much, Eric, and for your questions and the review. So.
And then Mike, what was that Facebook group if people wanted to try to find other editing superstars?
There's one called the Podcast Editors Club. It's run by a guy down here in Fort Worth area. And then there's another one, Podcast Movement is a Podcast Editors Club is just for editors only. And so it focuses on editing topics. Podcast Movement is where anyone from novices to advanced podcasters hang out and they ask each other questions and encourage each other. And if you want to listen to a different style of podcast that is highly produced, an NPR story type, one of my favorites that I produced and wrote the music for is called Who Rescued Whom? Canine Rescue Tales. And it's a story about adopting dogs.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we have one suggestion from Tina Aslani, and she is recommending or just giving a suggestion for having a possibility for real conversation instead of observing. So I don't think it's a available option on LinkedIn at the moment, but maybe this will change in the future and we will be able to communicate directly. So we definitely will be looking forward to those opportunities. I think live conversations with people also would be great. Thank you, Tina, for your comment.
X Spaces, maybe LinkedIn will take a call from that.
Okay.
Just saying.
Great. Yes. So then we're saying goodbye to all our viewers today. It was a great pleasure to be with all of you, and we hope you had fun and also learned. And also, this will help you to improve your careers and, in general, have fun in life. So, bye-bye.
Thank you all.
All right, thanks so much for having me.
Dear Neurocareers podcast listeners, thank you for joining me and my incredible guests on this exciting journey into careers in neuroscience and neurotechnologies. I hope you've been inspired by the stories of those turning groundbreaking ideas into impactful realities. If you are looking for more guidance on advancing your neurocareer, book a free consultation with me, Dr. K, your podcast host and Neurocareers coach at the Institute of Neuroapproaches, the only career service dedicated specifically to the needs of professionals in neurotech. Let's take the next step toward your neurocareer success together. In addition to free consultations, the Institute of Neuroapproaches offers a variety of services designed to help you thrive in neurotech. First, professional development planning. We help you create a tailored career development plan, identify knowledge gaps, and equip you with the tools needed to achieve your goals in neuroscience and neurotechnologies. Second, resume and cover letter review. Get expert feedback on how to craft documents that are specifically designed for job opportunities in the neurotech field. Third, interview preparation. Sharpen your interview skills through mock interviews and targeted feedback, including soft skills, hard skills in neurotech, BCIs, e.g., MEG, live coding, and presentation preparation. 4. Networking and job search strategy. Learn how to effectively network and uncover job opportunities while standing out in the competitive neurotech job market. 5. Negotiation and salary advice. Receive expert guidance on negotiating salaries and benefits and determining a fair salary range for your desired position. All this and more can be found at www.neuroapproaches.org. Again, www.neuroapproaches.org. So, what are you waiting for? Let's navigate the path to success in the world of neurocareers together and turn the impossible into possible. We're looking forward to working with you.